is going to have to, make it, and eventually he will, but, make it, mature. He's a strong kid. I liked how much the not being at the draft and being at the farm got play. That was a nice story. I really liked that.
That was awesome.
Yeah, it was, and the stuff he was doing, and you're committed if you're doing that. Like it's like there's a lot of NHL players who have farming backgrounds, or like Adam Henrique in the tobacco fields, talking about how when he got back, his parents were like, "We don't care that you're NHL, go to work," stuff like that. I think Pat Verbeek was like that too. There's a whole bunch of NHL players who are like that. I was surprised at some of the local hate for that pick. It reminded me of some of the complaints about Brady Tkachuk the year he was drafted, and people forget that pick got ripped. I think that Martin will be I think that Martin will be a good player for them. I think it's really interesting. So the other one move that Nashville made that got really hammered was the Nick Hague contract. And I was also a little bit surprised about that one. There was a ton of interest in Nick Hague, a ton of it. Vegas knew they couldn't keep him. They knew they wouldn't be able to fit him into their salary structure. There were a lot of teams out there on him. I think Philly was. I think Montreal was. I think Calgary was. I think Nashville was. Calgary, Vegas was trying to get Rasmus Anderson. But Nashville got him. And, again, I don't look at that contract where the cap is going as a real problem. I don't think that'll be a problem at all. Hague is going to be asked to take more responsibility more often than he's had to in the past. But every time I've watched him play, I see a really competitive, hard-nosed guy. Like, he's going to do exactly what you say. I've always liked Hague's game. Nashville has a lot of left-hand shots, so they kind of talked about how Yossi might play the right side. Hague has done that before too. The other one, Perbix, you talked about. I like the Perbix signing. I thought that was a really good deal, and I think he's a really solid player. Like Nashville won the offseason last year, as you said, and it didn't go very well. I think they attacked certain things last year. They didn't like the way they defended. So Perbix and Hague should help. I think the way that, and the other thing, I think, like Andrew Burnett had some really interesting quotes on the weekend about how they're kind of talking about, like, how do they need to change the way they played? And last year they changed the way they played during the season. They made some adjustments, and obviously it didn't work as well, but it does sound like it goes to what I just said before. You can either trade out of your problems or you can solve your own problems. It's always better and easier to solve your own problems. I don't know if it's all going to work, but I see Nashville as a team that attacked a couple of their issues. Defense, number one, and also internally, how do we play? Now, they still have a lot of ready shots up front. They're still going to have to make everybody happy up there. Like we talked about, the lefty shots on the blue line, the righty shots up front. There's still some, there's the questions at center. They've still got some holes they've got to fix here. But I think it looks like they were honest about what some of the problems were, and now they're going to try to fix them. And that's the step. That's the step you've got to make.
Okay, the St. Louis Blues. Got Pius Suter on a 2-year deal, Elliott. Nick Bjugstad comes in. Mailloux from the Montreal deal. They were a blink of an eye from the second round against Winnipeg in the playoffs, but it was a turbulent season to get to that point. So how do they feel about themselves heading into the summer?
I like this team. I like the group. I thought they had a couple of really smart, non-risky signings. Suter at 2 times $4.25 is nice. Nick Bjugstad, a couple of years to play center. Like down the middle, you've got Thomas, you've got Shen, you've got Suter, you've got Bjugstad. That's a good center group. They held on to Kyrou. We'll talk more about Kyrou when we get to Seattle. They did miss Holloway, but he should be healthy. I'm curious to see if they're going to extend Fowler. There was some talk that they might. They obviously haven't. So we'll see where that goes. But Fowler's headed into the last year of his contract, and he was a great fit there. I really like them up front. I like them in goal. They got Hofer signed. Binnington Hofer, that's a good duo. You could do a heck of a lot worse than that, and some teams have. I'm curious to see Mayu if he does make the jump to become a full-time NHLer next year. But I like the look of this team. A couple of things. Shen now goes from a full move clause to a no move clause to a partial. And the last couple of years, some teams, especially Canadian ones, like Toronto and Ottawa, have poked around him a bit. And I'm sure that their no trade list will handle some of this, but at least now he doesn't have the full protection anymore. The other thing I just wanted to talk about with the Blues is I got a call from a player who was upset at the Leddy situation. So Nick Leddy had a no trade clause until June 30th, and then he switched to a partial. And so I think it was like half the league. And, Doug Armstrong wanted to lighten the load in his defense. He wanted to move some pieces around. And Leddy was able, by his contract, to block a trade to San Jose. But he did not have a no move clause anymore. So they could put him on waivers, and San Jose claimed him. And there was a player who called me about it, and he was upset about that. He's like, the CBA just got done, and that is something like I've written before about maybe you just block teams as opposed to the partial no trade, no move, or whatever it is. Like maybe just block teams. And some people thought that was a really good idea, and some people thought that was a really stupid idea. But this particular player was kind of bothered that end around still existed. And, I understand that Nick Leddy, he's not complaining about it. I think I've heard he's got the right attitude about it, which is, okay, this happened. When I wake up in the morning, am I still in the National Hockey League? Answer, yes. Am I still making a very good salary, $4 million? Yes. So what do I have to complain about here, actually? 100%. I completely agree with that. I like people who think like that. I think that's the way you have to move through life. But there was one player who called me and said he just didn't like that is still allowed to happen. By the letter of the law, what happened to Leddy was completely allowed to happen. He just was bothered by it, and I wanted to shout out Leddy for having the right attitude about it.
I wonder if some of those things were brought up in any real degree of earnest during the talks around this CBA, and maybe it just was shot down. But stuff like this, because it's, to your point, like it's not the first time something like this. You mentioned Barclay Goodrow from a couple of years ago. Like that was a similar one that would fall into that category too, that would upset a lot of players around the league of how that all unfolded.
Yeah.
I can see why. Can totally see why. All right, the Utah Mammoth. Bring in JJ Peterka, sign him to a 5-year deal. Hello, Nate Schmidt, Brandon Tanev, Vitek Vanacek. You have said this is a team that needs more meat. Imagine finding meat. Are they still looking for some? Or are they starting to like what they got?
I like their moves. Peterka obviously was the big one. That gets a lot of the attention. He's a